Hey there, this is just going to be a quicker video. I'm just going to show you how I made my ham and my sleeve roll. And I made these maybe more than a dozen years ago, and they work great for me. My ham is a little different than the ones you find in the store usually. One, because it has a flat bottom. That way you don't need one of those little things that looks like a football holder. You know, a lot of times they have that so you can set it upright. Mine, I can just pop it on my ironing board. My hams are 100% full of sawdust, and I live in a rural area where there are sawmills everywhere, so I can just go down the road, fill a bag with sawdust. I think they sell it at like home improvement stores too and things like that, so wherever you are, just search on your own. But mine also, because of the way that I make it, if you look at the top, it's not like a 100% smooth, perfect top. And that's just the way it is. But because it is sawdust, I can kind of mold it a little bit if I need a tighter top or something like that. So I like it. It works for me. So what I want to show you is, in general, the method that I use and the dimensions that I use. So here we go. So starting with this sleeve roll, basically it's a tube, and the way that I layer my fabric is the same for both of these. I use a 100% cotton canvas or thick muslin for everything, and then I put an extra layer of wool, 100% wool on one side. So same here. And so what I'm going to be using today is, this is 100% cotton. It's printed, but it's a light print, so I don't think that matters. And it's from the home deck area. But what I do is I do 2 layers on each side, just so I can make sure if something gets a little hole in it, sawdust isn't going to come spewing out. So I cut 2 layers on one side, 1 layer on the wool side, and then a layer of wool here. So I have 2 layers of canvas on this side, a layer of canvas, and a layer of wool on this side. Okay, so this is like very basic, as you can see. It's like a wrapping up a package where I just got to the end of my tube, tucked it together, and whip stitched it closed, and it works great. Doesn't give me any problems at all. So the dimensions for this, I measured it. The pieces, if I was just going to cut fabric and sew it, the pieces for this are 7 inches wide. Well, you can't see it. 7 inches wide and 20 inches long. And that's going to give you enough of a length that you can wrap and tuck your ends and, you know, just ugly whip stitch it in. And I use a fairly tight seam here, you know, with a fairly strong thread, nothing super, but just make sure it's not your wimpiest thread, to sew your seams, just because, you know, it's going to last a long time and be under a little bit of pressure. Now, there's some people who roll up newspapers and things and put those inside their sleeve rolls, and there's all different kinds of things. Some people put a wooden dowel in the middle to keep it super straight. I just fill mine with sawdust, and that has been fine. Like I said, this thing is over a dozen years old, and it's just fine. I kind of like it because it's not super hard, but at the same time, it's, well, you can see it doesn't bend. So this one now, let me show you the dimensions that I use for it. I laid it down because it's been so long. What I would say is I have 2 pieces, and just letting you know a heads up, the piece is probably about 1 inch too long on the bottom. And that's because when I'm dealing with something like this, I would rather have it too long so I have more to tuck in than too little, you know, and have issues. So what I do is, with this piece, and the cut width is 11 inches. So the actual width from this seam to this seam is 10 inches. So we're guessing about a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Not precise, but, you know, close enough. So if you draw say a rectangle that is 6 inches tall and 11 inches wide, and from that point if you fold it in half, find that center point, use a compass or a dinner plate or whatever, and draw a circle to connect them, that will be your pattern piece. Mine is, when I did that, because this is 11 inches, it's a 5.5 inch diameter to the outside, 5 inches to my sewing line. Okay, so what I would do is cut one of wool, and I'm going to be using this. It's left over from something that I had made. It's a really nice suiting wool, but it is 100% wool. It's a little bit thinner than the one I used before, but as long as it's all wool, it's fine. So I'll be cutting one layer of this pattern piece and one layer of my 7-inch by 20-inch for my sleeve roll from this. Then from this canvas stuff, I'm going to be cutting 3 of these and 3 of my sleeve roll canvas pieces. Now the base of my ham, you can see this is not an exact circle. And that is because when I was making this, I was toying with a few different ideas, and I finally ended up saying, forget it, I want a flat bottom, so I just kind of came up with what I had. If I was to make it again and I wanted a exact circle to put on the bottom, what I would do is cut a circle that had a 4-inch diameter, okay? That's going to give you a very big seam allowance. So those are the pieces. Oh, and I would cut 2 of the canvas of this one. So that's going to give you all the pieces you need. So let me get those cut out and I'll show you how I put it together. Okay, so I'm going to be messing with the sleeve roll one first. So what I have is my layer of wool, 1 layer of the canvas, and then 2 layers of canvas. And I'm making sure that the right side, the pretty side, is going to be facing the wool, because that'll be the outside. Normally, you know, if you're using plain muslin, that does not matter one bit. So I'm just going to match it all up, and I'm going to sew all 4 layers down both sides at once. So down here and down here, just making a big tube. Alright, so I've got it sewn down. See, I have a little seam going there. I had to switch out my needles to a size 11 universal. My bigger 14 was skipping, so sometimes when you have several layers, you have to play with it. But now I'm going to turn it right side out, so I have 2 layers on each side. And I am not finishing off these seams because they're never going to touch anything. But what I need to do is close up one side. So like you saw on my my sample, I'm just going to shove a water bottle inside here just so I have something to push against while I'm stitching. Pull this up. So here's my little water bottle, and I'm just going to act like I am folding up a present. Pull it down some. Just tuck ends in. Again, it's not super precise at all. It's just to get a nice soft tube. So I'm going to pin it right where I want and come back, and I'm just going to whip stitch it along this side. I'm not going to worry about all these right now, just this side right here. Okay, so with just that little part stitched, this one is pretty ready to go ahead and start stuffing. Once I have it completely packed in and this circle is at its final dimension, then I'm going to come back and tuck down these other sides, but not right now. So we're just going to set this aside and get started on the ham. In the ham, it's the same thing. You lay it out the same way, where you have a piece of canvas, then a piece of wool, then 2 pieces of canvas, and stitch the whole thing together. And again, because I want it to be cute, I'm going to make sure that I have a pretty side looking out. And stitch just this way. And I'm using about a 1/2 inch, 5/8 inch seam allowance. Leave the bottom open right now. So I have it sewn around, and then up around this top curve, I've just made little clips. I stay about a 1/4 inch away from my sewing line. I don't want to get it too close, but I want to give it enough flexibility that I can somewhat make that curve. So I've just kind of clipped it, maybe every 1.5 inches or so from this whole half circle. So now I'm going to turn it right side out. Okay. And I am going to come back now, and I'm going to serge around this bottom edge just so that they'll work as one piece. If you don't have a serger, use a zigzag machine, but just to keep that bottom edge somewhat together for the next step. Okay, and I'm going to do the same thing with this circle. I'm pulling off my pattern, obviously, but I'm going to go ahead and just make sure a right side is looking out, because that is pretty. Serge around the edge so I can treat both pieces as a single piece. Okay, so now I have my circle serged around the edges, and I just folded it in half and put little pins where the halfway point is, because actually I'm going to turn this back, wrong side out again. What I'm going to be doing is matching up these little halfway point pins with where my seams are and pinning those in. Now, I am going to only pin this like 2/3 of the way around, because I want to make sure I have a big enough space that I can poke all my sawdust in and be able to stick my hand or a tool or something in there to be able to pack it down. So I am going to be sewing the wool side by machine. And if your bottom does not turn out to be 100% circular, don't sweat it, because mine definitely is not, and it works great. So like I said in the beginning, this length is a lot longer than it probably needs to be, but that's because I like to have a lot of extra seam allowance. So this seam allowance here is actually probably going to be closer to about 1 inch. And you can see that it's a little bit wavy up here, and that's because I'm just kind of easing it in there. I'm just kind of pinning it in at random, and I'm going to just put it on my sewing machine and sew it. And if there's a tiny little pucker, it doesn't really matter because it's on the bottom of a ham. So let me finish pinning this, again, about 2/3 of the way. So I'm going to be coming past this seam line, maybe 1 inch or so, and past this seam line about 1 inch or so. So my opening is on the cotton side. All right, so this is what it looks like. My sewing started right about here and went all the way around to about here. So on the inside, I've got this very wide seam allowance. And what I'm going to do now is turn it right side out. Poke this bottom out, and now I have this opening here that's big enough to put the sawdust in. So next step is get a boatload of sawdust and go sit down and start punching it in there. I got them done. So here's my old standby. Here's my new one. My new one looks like it's a little bit bigger, but the actual dimensions of the fabric around are the same. Now here's the thing. This one, it is older, and all the sawdust I put in here has dried out, you know, so it's a lot drier. This was fresh pine sawdust, and so it's moist. It's just like a cereal box. Some settling will occur, so don't get rid of all of your leftover pine or whatever wood sawdust you have, because settling could happen. I think that I had to go and top off these guys at least once, but it could be 6 months from now. But as you see, what the key is, put in some sawdust, tap it in, put in more sawdust, tap it in, because you're looking for something that's lovely and firm. Okay, and then I just came back, whip stitched it around that opening, and the same with my sleeve roll, and the one side I have secured a lot. I have a lot of messy stitches all around holding it in. This side, not so much. This side just has this, and that's because when settling does occur, this is the side I'm going to open just to fill it up. But even with just the one stitch, nothing's coming out because it's all tucked in there. So if you have any questions, let me know. For the dimensions for these guys, just go back and pause the video where my little outline is. It's pretty easy to make them. And yeah, it stands up on its own. So you can lay it down. I can do collars up here, because it's all sawdust. You can tap it and slightly mold it, so I can mold it into whatever size sleeve head I want. Now, if I'm going to be pressing something on here and these little crevices are really going to bother me, get another piece of fabric and just slide it over the top, and that'll smooth it out, and then put your other one on top. If you're pressing a wool, put a piece of wool on. If you're pressing a cotton or something else, just put a piece of muslin or something over there. But honestly, I don't have any trouble with it as is. The little wrinkles don't bother me at all. It's usually this surface or this surface that I'm going for. This for a sleeve head, all kinds of things like that. And I love being able to just stand it up on its own, which you can't do with the oval bean-shaped ones. So anyhow, there you go. Enjoy. Bye-bye.